My dad works in B2B marketing, but I never really knew what that meant. Then one day my dad came by my school for career day and told everyone in my class he was a big ROAS man. Then he just kept saying things like, the bigger the ROAS, the better, over and over. My friends still laugh at me to this day. I think it means calculating a return on ad spend. One thing's for sure, I'll be known as the ROAS man's kid for the rest of my days. Why couldn't you just be a fireman or a lawyer? Why? You ruined my life, Dad.
Not everyone gets B2B, but LinkedIn has the people who do. And with ads on LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people based on job title, industry, likelihood to buy, and more. Start converting your B2B audience into high-quality leads today. We'll even give you a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/MPN to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/MPN. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.
You may know you're listening to this show along the Marketing Podcast Network, but did you know there are other great shows on MPN to help your business? Colin Jeffries and Eric Reed host a great podcast called the Rethink Marketing Podcast. Colin, tell us what these fine folks will get out of listening.
Well, Jason, on the Rethink Marketing Podcast, we unpack the myths, misconceptions, and flat-out lies of marketing and sales. Our listeners tell us that we help bring different perspectives to common business growth, wisdom, and advice.
That's great. Where can people subscribe?
They can subscribe at rethinkmarketingpodcast.com or listen on their favorite podcast platform, including marketingpodcasts.net.
You heard him. Go subscribe.
Welcome to Storylines Live, the only podcast that explores the meaning and the power of the most important story in business. The one that answers why someone should buy from you, work for you, invest in you, or partner with you. This is the story that defines the very character and nature of an organization. At WordWrite, we call this your capital S story. In each episode, we feature guests who have great insights on business storytelling, who can share their experiences and key learnings to help you and your business do a better job of sharing your capital S story to deliver remarkable results. Today, we're honored to have Eric Guy as our guest. Eric is the founder of the Center for Victory, a very interesting organization that works with businesses and sometimes individuals to help them achieve their greatest potential. Eric, tell our guests a little bit more about what you're up to these days at Center for Victory.
Sure. Thanks for having me, Paul. It's always good talking to you. I'm a big fan, of course, you know that, but maybe some of the people watching don't know that I'm a big fan of what you do. And you've helped us years and years and years ago create that for us. And it has been a game changer. Not only business wise, but it's, personally, it's been a game changer as well. Just the crafting of that and everything. But at Center for Victory, we do work with individuals mostly nowadays. It's mostly businesses or individuals within those companies where we, for the most part, we have a suite of assessments. So we have a handful of assessments that we typically use with our clients to help make better hiring decisions, but just how to coach people to, looking at internal difficulties like communication or, performance feedback, those kinds of things, how people are interacting relationally and in teams, really running that whole gamut from how you bring them in until they leave, right? You always don't want them to leave, especially if they're good, but we work on that whole continuum of really developing the person and helping managers and leaders develop their people so they can keep and can sustain growth in a rough environment. So that's great. In a nutshell what we do.
Well, I'll read a bio for a guest, but Eric, as you pointed out, we've known each other for years and we've worked together. So in a way, I feel not qualified because of our relationship. So thanks for sharing your bio. Really appreciate it. And we'll talk a little bit more about what we did together. Folks, when you have a chance to check the Center for Victory out after you listen to this podcast, in the show notes, we'll have a link to the Center for Victory, and you'll see the logo and the tagline, which is part of the work that Eric's team and WordWrite did together. Your champion for victory is, I believe, the tagline we put together. Right, Eric?
Your champion for success.
Success.
Yes.
Thank you. Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, one of the reasons I wanted to have you on the podcast is because you're a podcaster yourself. You have a podcast that is just blowing up. Tell the audience about your podcast, Eric.
So our podcast is Your Best Day Yet. And of course, not everybody does this. So Paul has been there to go back and forth and talk about things, how to just structure it, things like that. I mean, obviously other people have helped, but I mean, it does help when you have somebody else that's doing it that's close by and a close friend. But our podcast is Your Best Day Yet. On Your Best Day Yet, we initially launched that with some hesitation from me, because even though I like to present in front of people, I don't really care to be in front of a camera, especially sitting down at my desk, even though it's gotten so much easier over the past couple years. But we're really on those things. We try to bring people on, or when I'm doing it myself, really just giving our audience things to think about with their own personal and professional development. I've seen a lot of people over the years, coached a lot of people, high-level leaders that are knocking it out of the park professionally and just really stink personally, right? They just, a lot of stress, families in disorder, those kinds of things. And that's where, my background initially started, was the personal piece, and it made its way over into the professional area. And like I said, most of our clients are companies now. We still do those same things. But the podcast is about serving, especially our clients, who might not know some of the things that we do, or might need refreshed on them, or just, hey, look, might need some just uplifting motivation for the day when you're dealing with stuff, all around personal and professional growth. How to really engage it, how to unlock it, how to reinforce it, and really looking on how to enrich relationships in your environment, because that's all, it's all about connection.
That's awesome. Folks, we'll have in the show notes where to find the Center for Victory's podcast, Your Best Day Yet. I will say that Eric and I were talking before we hit record here, and one of the best places to take in the podcast is on YouTube. Eric's podcast and with his guests is video as well as audio. You can find it in all the usual places on audio, but it's a great place to see it on YouTube. Now, Eric, we always ask our guests about their capital S story. Obviously, that's what's important at WordWrite and the work we do. And as I explained in the introduction, there are 4 critical answers that we typically see with our clients in their story: why somebody would buy from them, work from them, invest in them, or partner with them. In terms of what you folks are doing today at the Center for Victory, what's the most important one of those 4 to your work today?
Oh, wow. So go over those again, one so I can hear them, and one so everybody else can hear them.
We always think of, and maybe I should put together something on this, a blog post or something. Like, think of a bullwhip.
Mm-hmm.
Buy, work, invest, partner.
I think more for us, it's partner.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to, I'm going down through the list, because I've given that list out to several people, like even from your presentations. I always call you and give you
thank you for that.
Like, hey, Paul. So I guess looking at that from a partner standpoint is one of the reasons is I just don't want to come in and do the work. Mm-hmm. Like, you might not talk to me for 6 months.
Right.
But when you're making that critical hire, mm-hmm. I want to be the person. We want to be the people that you call and say, hey, look, we trust what you're going to say. We know you're going to look at this. And, is it going to be perfect? No, not all the time. But we trust that you're going to take in all of this and give us what we need, and be able to, even if it's, being critical of something, saying no, right? That we have their best interest in mind, even though we're sitting outside the company. So if you're going to hire somebody, Paul, I'm going to take into account who you are, where's your team at, where's your market, all those things before we help you make that decision. And we really want to be on that bench to say, hey, look, call us first, call Eric first, see what he says. I've got a call coming up after this podcast, the same thing. It's prep for a high level position. They don't want to goof it up. So let's just kind of slow it down. And if we can partner with people like that, and I guess the big partner piece is when people align with our core values, that makes a good team, because that's where it's a win-win for us.
So thank you for sharing that. And I didn't mean to make you lie down on the couch there and and have to scroll through your cranium there and figure out which of those is the most important today. We do find that at different times in the life of a leader and the life of a business, different of those four categories that I provided tend to become important. I said earlier that the capitalist story defines the very character and nature of an organization. What I get from you is you're in a relationship business. It's not a transaction. Is that accurate?
Yeah. When we do those things, it's very relational. One, we want to have that connection because we know how important it is. I mean, that was my background. I mean, I didn't start off in business. So that's always been my background. I'm a licensed therapist, believed in the power of connection and how it can heal. And a lot of that I still bring into the companies, that the neuroscience around relationships, the brain and everything. And, when those connections happen, things start to happen inside of a company, like in a good, positive way. If you don't have that, it's hard to get to get the good initiatives and all that moving in the right direction. But if you can have that, and if you can look at that and really examine it, reinforce it, and make it part of the culture, that's what people are looking for. Because when you feel connected, that drives purpose for people. When you don't feel connected, it's real easy to just leave.
Yeah, it sure does. And that is something that I think a lot of folks who would claim to be doing the same kind of work that you do at Center for Victory miss. It is very important to start with the individual, right? What's really important is how that individual is interacting with the other individuals on a team when you're talking about organizational dynamics or a business, right? You can't just quote unquote help somebody and throw them into a polluted pool, right? Or one where they're not going to have success. It's important to create the environment that really is going to help everybody succeed, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, you mentioned a minute ago, you're a licensed therapist. So I always like to ask people, because in any business, it doesn't matter if it's multi-billion-dollar or a small business, the personal story of the leaders in the organization is critical to the overall story of the organization. So, Eric, how does your personal story inform what you do on a daily basis?
How does it inform that? So, my story coming into that, it's a good question, is, one, you have to know your story. Very important. Some of the things that we do when we do the cohorts that we're coming. I make, going back to what you do, I have them craft their own story.
Mm-hmm.
And much like that, before they get started, because that could be a scary experience for people. Right.
Yes.
I hand out my book. Right. And that book was not necessarily, the first book was not necessarily going to be out there to be published initially. It was just to get my story down. Right. This is what I'm all about. And what drives me and what's important with those impacts in my life, going from, can somebody improve? What does it take to improve? I mean, my biggest thing years and years and years ago, I just wanted to be happy.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what drove it initially. And, when I was in college, I lost my purpose. I really just wanted to be happy. And so I just inundated myself with material, around personal and develop. It was more personal development at that point in time. But I mean, I just consumed everything I could get my hands on, and then, you have to remember at that point in time, there was no Audible. There was no YouTube. There was, it was just trying to, there were a lot of cassette tapes.
Yep.
And they started to come in CDs. And so just consuming them. And I still have a lot of those, but just being mindful of those things. And it's really the mindset of people, right? Am I willing to get out of the way of myself? I think it was T. Harv Eker, but I might be misquoting, but, said that what just ain't so. Taking away all those things that you learned that were laid down while you were young and challenging them. But the other thing is getting around people who will help you challenge them.
Yes.
And sometimes it's just like, I go in sometimes to work with companies. I'm like, this doesn't feel hard enough for me. Right. But the reason is when you provide that connection and you start building the teams, right? People will step up to that because everybody's hardwired for connection. And when we have that, and when it's a safe environment, when we can share our own stories, I mean, this comes into the story piece again. I share my story all over the place. That's who made me. That's what created me. Yes. I don't really wish it on anybody, right? But that's what allows me to go in and see these things. And, we had a graduation last week for one of the cohort groups. And, in that cohort group, the joke is I can see into their soul. And they said that, and there's just things that I perceive that I have discernment on. I can't do anything else. That's my talent. Right. But part of my story created that, right? Yes. How I would look at things, how I see things, those experiences led me to create that. And I just had to learn how to utilize that in a responsible, love-based way instead of a very reactive, fear-based way. And that has made all the difference for me. And I can see how it makes the difference for a lot of the people that I work with.
That's great, Eric. Folks, we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to dig into what Eric just shared, the value of the work he does and how he works with the individuals and organizations he helps. Don't go away. We'll be right back.
You may know you're listening to this show along the Marketing Podcast Network, but did you know there are other great shows on MPN to help your business? Colin Jeffries and Eric Reed host a great podcast called the Rethink Marketing Podcast. Colin, tell us what these fine folks will get out of listening.
Well, Jason, on the Rethink Marketing Podcast, we unpack the myths, misconceptions, and flat-out lies of marketing and sales. Our listeners tell us that we help bring different perspectives to common business growth, wisdom, and advice.
That's great. Where can people subscribe?
They can subscribe at rethinkmarketingpodcast.com or listen on their favorite podcast platform, including marketingpodcasts.net.
You heard him. Go subscribe.
Welcome back, folks, to this episode of Storylines Live, the only podcast that explores the power and the meaning of the most important story in business. The story that answers why somebody should buy from you, work for you, invest in you, or partner with you. At WordWrite, we call that your capital S story. In our episode today, we've got Eric Guy of the Center for Victory with us. Eric, you mentioned before we took our break that you're also an author. Could you tell our audience a little bit about the books you've written?
So, two are in the process of getting edited. They were on the front burner before COVID. And then, of course, you and everybody else knows we had to pivot there.
All we had to do is say one word, COVID, and people say,
Yeah. So we had to learn how to do everything that we do remotely. So that took up space. But the first book that you even had input in, The Life of Victory.
Yes.
What we talked about before break is how to overcome fear. right? In a really a love-based way. It's not long. I think it's a very easy read. I like to still read it. But it's helped a lot of people. And it was more, I wrote it for me. When I got done writing it, it sat for quite a while, I think about 18 months before we ever decided to publish it. I just wanted to kind of get my whole story in my head. And this is why, again, with a lot of the cohorts that we do inside of the companies that we serve, this is why we make every individual write their story. Now, not a whole book, right? We actually ask them to keep it to about 20 to 25 minutes, tell their peers. And what that does is it opens up people's eyes, because what you hear is the background. And then once those people start doing those things, Paul, and this, but
yes,
it creates a synergy inside the group because you now know what they've been through. But for that person to go through that and to, we're building in leadership, we're building in especially emotional intelligence. And that's why we have them tell their story, because you have to know, why do I react that way? Okay. I might not be able to be a manager if I continue to react the way that I do. I could be a manager if I take those gifts and use them in a responsible way.
Wow.
Right. Yeah. I think of one young man, just recently in the past year or so. I didn't know his backstory, right? He's very young, but you go back in his story, and it's just amazing to hear that at one point in time in his high school career, he was like homeless and had to go to a spring just to get water for his family.
Wow. That's amazing. And those are the kinds of things that typically the conventional wisdom would tell you don't belong in an organizational or business environment. Yet that's where you start, right? When you work with organizations, my interpretation, Eric, it's a collection of individuals. It could be a team. You structure them into what you call cohorts. Could you give the audience a sense of what a cohort is and how you work with people in that cohort to create results?
So these are currently already clients. So let's preface it that way. They know what I'm doing. I've proven myself already. We've worked together. I feel like they're a good fit for what we do too. So they're already clients using, some of the assessments that you guys utilize and things like that. What they're looking for is to keep, maintain, and build up their high potentials. All right. We hear a lot about that in the media nowadays of just, how do I retain the good folks?
Yes.
All right. So this is, we first identify, and we can't bring everybody in. All right. Because we lose the effectiveness of the group when it gets above 12 folks. So we like to run that for the year. Kind of the sweet spot we like to look for is like 9 to 10 people. So between 8 and 10 folks to go through at least a whole year together. And work on these dynamics. So what initiates it is the high potentials. How do we keep our high potentials? Not just keep them in the company, but how do we keep them engaged? How do we give them what they need so they feel like they're part of, so they don't, because everybody else knows their high potentials too. So they're getting picked off by recruiters here and there. So how do we create the stickiness inside the company to keep these people? So they're identified. And then what that does after the company starts utilizing it, that becomes a feeder because other people want to come into that, right? Because the so-called story gets out that, oh my goodness, they're investing in us, they care about us. And, so it might be, one cohort, we're starting our third year in January.
Wow.
Those folks will be together for 3 years and only one has left the company.
Wow. Yeah, that is amazing in this crazy post-COVID remote environment. Now, when you say high potentials, I know that this is not an age-based thing, but give the audience just a little bit of a sense. I know, because we know each other, you've been working with a lot of Gen Zs and millennials in these high potential groups, who a lot of older folks. Our podcast is not on video yet. It will be someday, but if it were, people would see that I'm of a certain age. And people in my age group tend to be complaining a lot about what Gen Zs and millennials want. And again, knowing you, I know that a lot of the success you've had is working with companies to, as you said, attract, maintain, and grow these individuals. Tell our audience a little bit about what that's like.
Well, I find it fascinating because it goes against everything that you hear, and we're bringing people in. I mean, the group that I was talking about that's on year 3. We've got folks that are older than me. We've got folks in there that are have my age. So we've got 3 different generations. Sometimes, in some cases, 4. Which is kind of crazy because we get to break down all those barriers.
Yes.
And now, so that if we have somebody that's a little bit more seasoned, if we have a person, that's been in the company 25 years, and now you got somebody that's young, that's only been with the company 3 years, and that, the one that has more experience is telling their story, that young one goes, "Oh, I never knew that about that person." And then when the young one goes to tell their story, the old one, the older one, the more experienced one goes, "Oh, I never knew that before." And so, again, it creates that connection, but then it creates that synergy of, hey, we've shared our stories. I got to know a little bit about you. You just hear things like work ethic, like, where did you learn it from?
Yes.
That was a big thing for one of the gentlemen I'm thinking about. He just would get so frustrated with all these, he called them the new kids, right? And once he told his story, I mean, he started elaborating on his story, got off script even.
Wow.
And was saying, "Oh my goodness, I got this growing up because somebody, my father, poured into me, showed me how to do this. I became that just because he took me around when I was very young." And my experience started, for him, his experience started when he was 11 or 12.
Wow.
So now he's seeing these kids come in, and their experience isn't starting till the 21, 22, 23, 24 years of age. So, the thing, and he will say it, the things he used to say and do are no longer. He still has that great work ethic. Yes. But he understands that it has to be developed. There has to be some part of it. Wasn't just all nature that gave him that. There was the nurture part. And, I think it's hard, speaking from, he's, same generation as me, Gen X, sometimes it's hard to see those things with people when you're, when you're used to go and just figure it out. And then you have somebody that can't, appears that they can't do that. But then when you turn those stakes and start understanding what's really going on, you see, you put the fire in the belly of that young person, and all of a sudden they become that person, right? And no longer there's no frustration and things like that. It tears down the barriers, tears down the walls, and all of a sudden you have people who are 2 generations from each other that are now working together, that like one another. The young ones listening to the wisdom of the older one, the older ones learning all the new clicks and nuances that they're bringing into the workforce.
So true.
And people, their customers notice that too. That's the other big thing. Their customers notice that there's no kind of dissension between those ages, and it creates a culture where everybody's welcome too.
Wow. I think people can get a sense from what you're sharing, but I always like to ask this question because it relates to the direction of the organization when you're talking with a leader, and also to the individual leader's focus, viewpoint, experience. What gives you the most satisfaction in what you do?
Getting that email, or a lot of times just getting a thank you. And it's just as simple as that of, I can't believe that I've come this far. It was, last week we had a graduation for a cohort that has been doing the program for a year. And these folks came in and, some of them, they actually said they were extremely reluctant to even do it. I mean,
wow.
The one even said it took him about 5 months to actually believe that something was going to come out of this.
Holy cow.
But to see the emotion behind it and to see the change from when they come in, they're so nervous and so, oh my goodness, what's going to happen? What's going to happen? They almost think that like we're going to like torture them. And so, and to have them just develop, it's like, you have the butterfly while it's in the cocoon, and you have to wait, it gets developed.
Metamorphosis.
And
one
then
of my
all of
favorite long words, right?
And all of a sudden you get this big, beautiful butterfly. And a lot of them, that's what it was like. They're so appreciative. They learn things that they just don't impact their professional life.
Yes.
They understand that this is impacting tremendously my personal life. Absolutely. My children, my grandchildren, in some cases, my parents, and all those things. And it's making a huge impact, not just in the widget we make or the software that we sell or whatever it might be. We're making an impact. Then that impact, for some of them, they all live in the same community, which is really cool because it's making an impact in the community.
Yes.
And if it's making an impact in community, over a period of time, over a couple years, the community starts even paying attention to that company. And it actually gives the company a competitive advantage in the marketplace because they start to hear those stories of, this is what they do for their people.
That is awesome. And a lot of people, I guess, again, conventional wisdom, people don't think about that. They don't understand that the impact of a company or an organization and the people within that organization extends beyond the walls of the organization, right? You really do carry home with you what happens at work, and you obviously bring into the workplace everything that formed and shaped you before you got there, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Eric, how can people find you?
You can always look up Center for Victory. So on Instagram, we're Center for Victory. On LinkedIn, we have a Center for Victory page. I have my own page, Eric Guy. We're on Facebook, Eric Guy and Center for Victory. Twitter, all the social media,
right?
Yeah. And
your website, right?
And our website is centerforvictory.com. Yeah, that's
great. Awesome. Eric, I want to thank you so much, my friend, for being with us for this episode. We'll have to do this again. Folks, Eric was kind to have me on, I don't know, 2-3 times on your
yes, sir.
On your podcast. So I think we're going to get there too, for sure. Again, Eric shared where to find him. It'll be in the show notes. I want to say thank you to everybody who's been with us listening to this episode. If you like what you heard, please like, share, and subscribe. And join us next time for Storylines Live, the only podcast that explores the power and the meaning of the most important story in business, the one that answers why somebody would buy from you, work for you, invest in you, or partner with you. Your capital S story. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.
You may know you're listening to this show along the Marketing Podcast Network, but did you know there are other great shows on MPN to help your business? Colin Jeffries and Eric Reed host a great podcast called the Rethink Marketing Podcast. Colin, tell us what these fine folks will get out of listening.
Well, Jason, on the Rethink Marketing Podcast, we unpack the myths, misconceptions, and flat-out lies of marketing and sales. Our listeners tell us that we help bring different perspectives to common business growth, wisdom, and advice.
That's great. Where can people subscribe?
They can subscribe at rethinkmarketingpodcast.com or listen on their favorite podcast platform, including marketingpodcasts.net.
You heard him. Go subscribe.
This podcast is heard along the Marketing Podcast Network. For more great marketing podcasts, visit marketingpodcasts.net.